the ship they painted grey. She was built to prove a lie. Identical cabins, no first class, no steerage. A cruise ship where a factory worker from Hamburg slept in the same kind of room as a Nazi party official. Hitler called it proof that National Socialism had erased class itself. It was 1937. The ship was the Wilhelm Gustloff. And the lie it was built to tell would not matter for very much longer, because 8 years later, on a night that reached 18 degrees below zero, more than 9,000 people would die on that ship in under 50 minutes. It remains the deadliest single sinking in maritime history. Not Titanic, not Lusitania, nothing else comes close, and almost nobody has heard of it. There's a reason for that, and the reason isn't an accident of history. It's something closer to an agreement, unspoken on both sides, to let this one go quiet. By January 1945, the war Germany started was coming home. The Red Army was inside East Prussia. Stories of what Soviet soldiers were doing to German civilians in retaliation for 4 years of occupation were moving faster than the front line. Some exaggerated, some not. All of them terrifying enough to empty entire towns overnight. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz ordered an evacuation. Operation Hannibal. Every available ship pulled into the largest sea lift in human history. Bigger than Dunkirk. Bigger than anything before or since. Over 2 million people would be moved west across the Baltic in 15 weeks. The Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't a passenger liner anymore by then. She'd been grey for years, repainted, armed with anti-aircraft guns, used as a floating barracks for submarine crews in training. Under the actual rules of naval warfare, that made her a legitimate target the moment the war started, regardless of who else was aboard. On January 30th, her gangways opened in the frozen port of Gotenhafen, and the rules of an orderly evacuation collapsed within hours. She was built for 1,465 passengers. Officials stopped counting at 6,000 and simply let people keep boarding. Best estimates today land somewhere past 10,000. Nearly 9,000 of them civilians, women, the elderly, thousands of children separated from parents in the crush, some of them infants handed up to strangers, already on deck because their mothers couldn't get through the crowd. Almost 400 were young women of the Naval Auxiliary Corps. They were given quarters in the ship's drained swimming pool, 3 decks down, with a metal staircase as the only way out. Nobody on that dock knew that detail would matter in 6 hours. 4 men held some form of command on the bridge that night, and not one of them agreed with the others. Wilhelm Zahn, a submarine officer, wanted to run fast through shallow coastal water, 15 knots close to shore, where a torpedo's running depth made an attack harder to pull off cleanly. The civilian captain, 77-year-old Friedrich Petersen, overruled him. He chose deep water and a slower 12 knots. The engines had been idle for years. He was afraid of breaking them. Then mid-evening, a radio message arrived, warning of a German minesweeper convoy somewhere ahead in the dark. To avoid a collision nobody could see coming, Petersen made one more decision. He turned on the ship's navigation lights, red and green, blazing against the Baltic dark, a lit-up target the size of a city block, moving at walking pace through the one body of water in Europe, where a Soviet submarine commander was actively hunting for exactly this kind of mistake. His name was Alexander Marinesko. He commanded the submarine S-13, and by January 1945, he was a man with almost nothing left to lose. He'd missed curfew in Finland. He'd been drinking. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, had him under investigation, and a war record wasn't going to save him from a labour camp unless that record included something undeniable, something enormous. At 7:30 p.m, he saw the lights. For nearly 2 hours he tracked the Gustloff on the surface, working into position on the landward side, the direction nobody expected an attack from, because nobody expected a submarine to risk running that close to shore. At 9:16 p.m, he fired 4 torpedoes. Each one carried a stenciled message painted onto the casing. 3 found the hull, for the motherland struck the bow, tearing through crew quarters where men were sleeping. For Leningrad hit just below the waterline, directly into the drained swimming pool. The staircase that was the only way out of that compartment was gone in the same instant as the women it was meant to save. For the Soviet people found the engine room. The lights went out across the entire ship. The radio died before a clear distress call could go out. 10,000 people plunged into total blackness on a ship already listing hard to one side. The air outside was 18 below. The water was barely above freezing. The lifeboats were frozen solid to their davits. Crew tried axes on the ice, and some of them lost their footing and went into the water themselves, into water that stops a human heart in minutes, sometimes less. The list made half the lifeboats impossible to launch at all. People moved toward the high side instinctively, which made the crowding on the stairwells worse, which is how children were trampled in pitch darkness by adults who could not see what they were stepping on. Survivors described something that doesn't usually make it into the official accounts: the sound, not screaming eventually, something quieter and worse as the cold did its work and thousands of voices simply stopped at roughly the same time. Mothers carrying more than one child reached the icy slope of the deck and had to choose. Some of them chose to go into the water holding both. 45 minutes after the first hit, the bow went under. The ship was gone. Somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 people died that night. The exact number has never been settled, because the exact number who boarded was never settled either. It is, by any honest count, the worst single loss of life from one ship in the history of the sea. So why isn't this a story everyone knows? 3 different countries had 3 different reasons to let it sink out of memory, and none of those reasons were an accident. West Germany spent the post-war decades confronting the Holocaust, and rightly so. In that climate, drawing attention to German civilian deaths, even genuinely horrific ones, risked sounding like an attempt to rebalance the moral ledger of a war Germany had started. Nobody wanted to be the person making that argument. The Gustloff became something people knew about privately and didn't discuss publicly. East Germany simply erased it. The disaster happened at Soviet hands, in territory that became Soviet-controlled, and the GDR was not a place where you criticised the Red Army in a history textbook. It came out of the curriculum entirely. The Western Allies had no use for the story either. It wasn't their victory, and it wasn't their tragedy. It didn't fit anywhere in the narrative they were building about how the war had ended. And the Soviets, who had every reason to celebrate it as a strike against the German Navy, complicated their own story too. Marinesco's personal conduct, the drinking, the discipline problems, meant Moscow wasn't eager to hold him up as a hero, even after sinking the single deadliest target of the entire war for either side. He was denied the recognition his result should have earned him, and died of cancer in 1963, largely forgotten. In a country that didn't know what to do with a war hero, it found embarrassing. It took until 1990 months before the Soviet Union itself ceased to exist, for Mikhail Gorbachev to posthumously name him a hero of the Soviet Union. By then, there was almost nobody left who remembered why that mattered. The wreck sits today in the Baltic Sea, marked on Polish navigation charts simply as obstacle number 73. It is a recognised war grave. Polish authorities prohibit diving within 500 metres of it. No memorial plaque marks the spot from the surface. No coordinates are publicised for visitors. The deadliest sinking in maritime history has a number instead of a name, and a 500-metre exclusion zone instead of a monument. 3 governments needed it quiet, for 3 different reasons, and the result was the same in every direction. Silence. 9,000 people went into the water that night because a captain turned on 2 lights he didn't need to turn on, and a submarine commander needed a victory large enough to save his own life. Both of those things happened inside a war that one side started and was now losing on every front. The ship still lies where it sank, marked as an obstacle, visited by almost no one, carrying a number larger than Titanic's dead, and a silence 3 different histories agreed, without ever discussing it, to keep. Type Gustloff in the comments if you'd never heard this number before today.